Thank you very much for this occasion of sharing ideas and perspective for our church. I cut my presentation not because I fear Sister Helen, not only because I fear, but because I prefer to discuss with you about the central problems, the real problems. In my speech, I planned to describe the main tendencies in contemporary religious life in Western world. My intention was to discuss three aspects of this situation. The first aspect concerned the religious pluralism in public sphere and the difference between the plurality of religions as a matter of fact and the religious pluralism, an expression, religious pluralism, which refers not only to the description of a fact, but to a value, that is, to the idea that this fact, the plurality of religions in Western experience, is a good thing and has to be improved or managed with tolerance, another key word. The second aspect I planned to explain concerned the definition of the term fundamentalism, the description of the several types of fundamentalism, and above all, the reconstruction of a logic of fundamentalism, that is, the structure, the categories, the mental structure that are able to produce this way of life. I described it as a pathology, an illness of thought, not only of the religious thought. In this pathology, in particular, a contingent, circumscribed assumption is immediately held to be valid, necessary, and absolute for everyone. Fundamentalism, in a word, reveals a lack of mediation. The third and the last aspect of contemporary Western human landscape, in my opinion, which I had to describe, was that of indifference. Pope Francis often speaks about a globalized indifference, and the term indifference means, above all, religious indifference. The idea, according to which all religious wars are essentially the same, are consequences of a non-scientific mentality and must therefore be repudiated. But indifference is contagious. It leads to nihilism. According to it, everything can be placed on the same level: ideologies, philosophies, beliefs, and nothing has meaning anymore. Well, I have no time for explaining these phenomena in detail. I cannot discuss it more deeply. And yesterday, Gianfranco Ravasi, José Caruana, Hans Joas, José Casanova described very well some aspect of this situation. I want now to discuss directly another problem, which is connected, in my opinion, with these three aspects of contemporary experience, religious experience. I mean the necessity to rethinking, to reshaping our idea of universality. For the same, I have to begin again with the concept of indifference. I say it. Pluralism, fundamentalism, nihilism are aspects, are phases of indifference. Indifference is the illness of our time. it's a contagious illness. For the translator, I am going to point 5 of my presentation. As I have already stated above, indifference concerns not only the religious fears or the secular attitude toward them, but also, in more general terms, the life of the person that does not believe. Nothing has meaning anymore, I said. This is the nihilism we must deal with today. What's the therapy for this illness? My idea is that fundamentalism and indifference arise from a wrong way of looking at the relationship between the particular and the universal. That is to say, from the tendency to identify the contingent with the absolute, and from the attempt to avoid mediation between these two levels. And then the therapy should consist in rethinking, in reshaping this relation in a proper way. First of all, it's necessary to rethink the philosophical notion of universality. If we wish to avoid both the rigidity of fundamentalism and the confusion of indifference, then we should establish a proper way to mediate between particularity and universality. This is where the problem lies. Yet, we cannot avail ourselves for this purpose of the mediation which has been developed by a certain philosophical tradition starting from Plato. Rather, we should refer to the idea of mediation which was elaborated by Christianity and was drawn upon by various strands of philosophical thought. In fact, in order to save the phenomena from their contingency, Plato considers the content of a universal as fixed in a transcendent sphere. Plato locates the universal in another preliminary world, which is defined once and for all. The world of ideas, we know, the real, absolute, and eternal world. And the world of experience must comply with this word and be commensurate to it. If the phenomena of experience adhere to the world of idea, then they can be legitimized and saved. They can be seen as object of the very true knowledge. Otherwise, they lose themselves in the flux of becoming. The philosopher, especially, for example, Socrates, guarantees and verifies the accuracy of this adherence. The philosopher is the one who provides phenomena with their stability, and the philosopher does so consistently, even putting his life at risk. Socrates made it. From the perspective of Plato, the phenomena of a world of experience undoubtedly gain a stable reference point. This occurs only if they adhere to the world of ideas. Nevertheless, there is only one way to achieve this adherence and to verify it. And only the philosopher is aware of it. Anyone who is not aware of this way or does not subscribe to it is wrong. In Plato's view, therefore, the mediation between particularity and universality is fixed once for all, in the form of an incorporation of a particular and the contingent in an universal and eternal perspective, because only the universal is valuable. In opposition to this rigid and exclusive subsumption of the particular under the universal, Christianity invites us to follow another path. On the one hand, the path to incarnation, and on the other hand, the path to redemption. In philosophical terms, not in theological terms, incarnation means that the absolute becomes contingent, that the absolute enters into history. In this way, there is no definite separation between history and eternity, which can be handled only by letting the former comply with the latter. That is, only by subordinating the particular to universal. Rather, there is a dynamic relation which fosters the connection between these two levels, and at the same time preserves their unsurmountable difference. Furthermore, redemption is not only the focal and terminal point of salvation. It's not only an experience aimed at retrieving the eternity of what is contingent, but also the course that a human being must follow in order to realize all these. There is more. By means of the individual's moral actions and the participation in the community's rights, this course foreshadows, as much as possible, the eternal life on this earth. If considered in this way, both redemption and incarnation do not identify in an indifferent manner the absolute with the contingent, the universal with the particular. Neither do they separate once and for all these two levels or interpose between them as the only possibility for correlation and adherence of the former to the latter, seen as a subordination and an integration of the particular within the universal. Rather, Christian history and Christian doctrine promote the idea of an authentic relation, a relation in which the differences are maintained and the connection is established without eliminating them. This is possible because, unlike the static relationship envisaged by Plato, this relation is dynamic. It is not defined once and for all. In other words, the sphere of the incarnation is where the absolute meets the contingent and inhabits it. What is contingent and historical is, in this way, sanctified and devoted to increasingly accomplish its sanctification throughout history. For this reason, it can strive towards the absolute and undertake the path to redemption. Even so, the absolute remains absolute and the contingent remains contingent throughout this relationship. Therefore, if the problem resides in the question of how to understand the relation between the particular and the universal without succumbing neither to indifference nor to fundamentalism, then the solution might be provided by opening up a different way for understanding the self-same notion of universality. The point is not to separate universal and particular. Neither is it to blend them together. The relationship arises from a mediation, from following a path. What underlies the transference of the particular to the universal is precisely this dynamic, this act of following a path. They coincide with a process which has to be chosen, which can to be activated, of universalization. 4 minutes. If we start from this process of progressive universalization, we can also begin to understand this concept of mission, the same concept of mission. So, if universality is a process and not a given fact, then we should talk about universalizability and not about universality. This term, universalizability, indicates the way in which the particularity of one's position is not immediately viewed as universal or adhering to a universal dimension, but is, instead, prompted to realize itself in a universal way. This can be achieved only if one is willing to exchange views with others, only if one is exposed to the position of others and affirms oneself in relation to others. All this is intervened to the awareness that by virtue of incarnation, one's particularity contains an aspect that can be universalized, an aspect that can stimulate openings instead of closure, an aspect that must be chosen and realized. In conclusion, I believe that plurality is not pluralism. It's a given fact, not a value in itself. Fundamentalism offers a possible solution to the problems of the relationship between various religions in our pluralistic landscape, in our plural and pluralistic landscape. Fundamentalists offer a solution, a very easy solution. It argues that one's particular position possesses a universal value immediately. At its heart, therefore, fundamentalism coincides with relativism, because fundamentalism absolutizes a relativistic particular stance. Fundamentalism bears witness to indifference and adds to the confusion between particular and universal. It exemplifies an indifference inherent in many other, not necessarily religious conceptions. Basically, indifference consists in confusing the particular with the universal, the relative with the absolute. This leads inevitably to violence. Well, in order to overcome this situation, in my opinion, it's necessary to adopt a different perspective. The given fact of universality must be transformed into the process of universalizability. It's not possible to achieve unity by attempting to make the self coincide with itself or by attempting to forge a closed identity. Rather, unity can be brought about by building up and fostering a true relationship between the self and the other. Unity consists in a dynamic of unification. This is a point. Unity is interaction, not only action, interaction and communion. We have the word communion. This does not mean that I lose my identity or that I renounce the truth which this identity expresses. Neither does this mean that I shed this identity in favor for a wider dimension. Quite the contrary, the identity of the individual develops and is realized only through the relationships it establishes. In this way, this open identity contributes to move one's particular position toward the process of universalization, toward the universalizability of the act of welcome and the act of mission. Summing up, dialogue, communication, open identity, the open identity they express, allow us to experience the very same identity of Christianity and the dynamics of progressive universalization which characterizes it. All this contains the antidote to the illness of fundamentalism and indifference. Above all, this is what provides us with the indication of how to concretely realize and experience a welcoming church. Thank you very much for your attention.